Women in an isolated orphanage start getting pregnant unexpectedly, causing a wave of anxiety. The director installs hidden cameras to get to the bottom of what's going on, and what she discovers changes everything. Subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching us from. Nestled on the outskirts of a quiet countryside, the rehabilitation center was a haven for women who had faced unimaginable hardships. It stood at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by dense woods and rolling hills. The isolation provided a sense of security, a barrier from the chaos and cruelty that many of its residents had fled. The building itself, a modest brick structure with peeling white paint, spoke of years of service and perseverance. Though far from luxurious, it offered warmth, shelter, and a second chance. The center was run by Amara, a former social worker in her early 40s, whose sharp eyes and commanding presence concealed a heart deeply attuned to the pain of others. She had spent her career fighting for those the world had discarded, and the center was her crowning achievement, a place where women could rebuild their lives, free from judgment. Her determination was matched by her small team. Irina, a kind but no-nonsense administrator, and a handful of volunteers who believed in the center's mission. Life at the center was simple but structured. Each day began with a shared breakfast in the communal dining hall, where mismatched chairs and tables created a sense of homely comfort. Women of all ages and backgrounds gathered around, chatting over cups of tea and plates of warm porridge. After breakfast, they dispersed to various activities. Some tended to the sprawling vegetable garden. Others worked in the modest sewing workshop that produced items sold to local markets. These routines provided a sense of normalcy and purpose, a stark contrast to the chaos many had left behind. The women who arrived at the center carried scars, both visible and hidden. Layla, a soft-spoken refugee from a war-torn region, spent her days quietly sketching in the garden, finding solace in art. Maria, a former factory worker, was rebuilding her confidence after escaping an abusive marriage. There were stories of survival in every corner of the center, each woman finding her own way to heal. Despite the sense of community, the center faced constant financial strain. Funding came from small donations, local grants, and occasional sales of produce and crafts. Amara often worked late into the night, poring over budgets and writing grant applications, her resolve never wavering despite the challenges. Recently, the center had begun receiving regular donations from a pharmaceutical company, Evosenza. Their shipments of food, water, and vitamins were a godsend, filling gaps that Amara couldn't cover on her limited budget. The arrival of Evosenza's supplies was always a minor event. A white delivery truck would pull up to the gates, and a uniformed driver would unload neatly packed boxes marked with the company's sleek logo. The representatives who occasionally visited were polite but distant, their tailored suits and careful smiles a reminder of the corporate world's detachment from the struggles of the center's residents. Still, their support was vital, and Amara accepted it gratefully, even if it left a faint sense of unease in her gut. It was during one of these routine mornings that the first signs of trouble appeared. Layla had been working in the garden, her delicate hands planting rows of carrots, when she suddenly collapsed. Irina rushed to her side, calling out for help as others gathered around. Layla's face was pale, her breathing shallow. By the time they carried her inside, she had regained consciousness, but was visibly shaken. "I just felt so dizzy," she whispered, "like the ground was spinning." The incident alarmed Amara, but the staff initially chalked it up to dehydration or stress. It wasn't uncommon for women at the center to suffer from lingering health issues, the toll of their past traumas. Layla was given water and allowed to rest, and the day continued as usual. But over the next week, more women began complaining of similar symptoms: nausea, dizziness, fatigue. At first, these episodes seemed isolated, easy to attribute to individual factors. Yet, as the complaints grew, a pattern began to emerge. Amara observed the women carefully. Layla, who had been at the center for 6 months, seemed the worst affected. But there were others. Fatima, a seamstress who rarely spoke of her past; Sophie, a young mother who had arrived with her toddler after fleeing an abusive household. All reported variations of the same symptoms, though none could pinpoint when they had started. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows over the center, Amara sat at her desk, reviewing medical files. The local doctor, who volunteered his time twice a month, had noted nothing unusual during his last visit. Stress, his report suggested, likely psychosomatic in nature. But Amara's instincts told her otherwise. Something was wrong, something beyond the ordinary struggles these women faced. Her suspicions deepened when Layla approached her one morning, her voice trembling. "Amara," she began hesitantly, I think I might be pregnant." Amara froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. She looked at Layla, searching her face for some sign of misunderstanding, but the young woman's expression was earnest, tinged with fear. "How can that be?" Amara asked softly. "You've been here for months, and—" She trailed off, the implications too strange to articulate. "I don't know," Layla replied, her voice cracking. "I don't know how it's possible." By the end of the day, whispers of Layla's situation had spread through the center. The other women reacted with a mix of shock, curiosity, and, in some cases, skepticism. Maria, ever pragmatic, voiced what many were thinking. She must be hiding something. People don't just get pregnant out of nowhere. Amara, however, wasn't so sure. The timing of Layla's symptoms, the growing reports of dizziness and nausea among other residents, it all felt too coincidental. Determined to uncover the truth, she decided to keep a closer watch on the center's daily routines and to dig deeper into the supplies they relied on so heavily. As night fell over the quiet countryside, Amara sat in her dimly lit office, her mind racing with questions. Outside, the women of the center retreated to their rooms, unaware that their sanctuary was about to become the epicenter of a mystery far more sinister than any of them could imagine. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the center's dining hall, casting warm light on the mismatched tables and chairs. Women gathered for breakfast as usual, their conversations lively despite the lingering tension. Layla sat quietly in a corner, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She avoided the glances of others who whispered among themselves, their voices low but insistent. The news of her possible pregnancy had spread quickly, creating an undercurrent of unease. Amara entered the room, her presence commanding immediate attention. She scanned the crowd, noting the nervous energy that seemed to ripple through the women. She approached Layla, who looked up with a weak smile. "How are you feeling today?" Amara asked, her tone gentle but firm. Layla hesitated, then nodded. "A little better, I think, but I still feel off." Amara placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out," she promised. "Just take care of yourself and let me know if anything changes." But Layla wasn't the only one experiencing strange symptoms. Over the next few days, more women came forward with complaints. Sophie, a young mother with a quiet demeanor, reported persistent nausea and fatigue. Fatima, the skilled seamstress who rarely spoke, mentioned dizzy spells that left her unable to focus on her work. Even Maria, one of the most pragmatic and physically strong residents, admitted to sudden bouts of weakness. At first, the symptoms seemed isolated, easy to attribute to the women's past traumas or the physical toll of their hard lives. Yet, as Amara compiled their stories, patterns began to emerge. The timing, the nature of the complaints, it all pointed to something larger, something she couldn't yet explain. One evening, as the women gathered in the common room for their usual activities, knitting, reading, or simply chatting, Amara called an impromptu meeting. She stood at the front of the room, her arms crossed, her expression serious. "I need everyone's attention," she began, her voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "Over the past week, several of you have come to me with concerns about your health. Dizziness, nausea, fatigue. I know many of you are worried, and I want you to know that I'm taking this seriously." The room fell silent. Women exchanged uneasy glances, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "I've already spoken to Dr. Patel, and he'll be coming to the center tomorrow for a full examination," Amara continued. "In the meantime, I want each of you to think carefully about when these symptoms started and anything that might have triggered them. It's important that we figure out what's going on." As the meeting ended, the women dispersed, their conversations now centered on Amara's announcement. In private, some voiced their fears. What if it was a disease? What if the center was unsafe? Others speculated about Layla's situation, their whispers laced with judgment. The next day, Dr. Patel arrived, his worn leather bag in hand. He was a kind, elderly man who had volunteered at the center for years, but even his calm demeanor couldn't entirely dispel the tension in the air. One by one, he examined the women, asking detailed questions about their symptoms and conducting basic tests. By the end of the day, his findings were inconclusive. "There's no clear cause," he told Amara in her office, his brow furrowed. "Their vitals are normal, and there's no sign of any infectious disease. If I had to guess, I'd say it's stress-related." Amara nodded, but her instincts told her otherwise. The timing was too coincidental, the symptoms too uniform. Something was affecting these women, and she was determined to find out what. As the days passed, the situation grew more alarming. Layla's condition progressed, confirming what she had feared. She was indeed pregnant. Soon after, Sophie reported similar symptoms, and a quick test revealed the same result. By the end of the week, 4 women had confirmed pregnancies, each claiming they had no idea how it was possible. The news sent shockwaves through the center. Women who had once found solace in their shared struggles now began to turn on one another. Accusations flew. Some whispered that Layla had secretly left the center at night, while others speculated about hidden relationships. Amara worked tirelessly to quell the growing unrest. She held private conversations with each of the pregnant women, searching for any clue that might explain what was happening. But their stories remained consistent. None of them had left the center or had contact with anyone from the outside. Desperate for answers, Amara turned her attention to the center's routines. She began to scrutinize everything, from the food they ate to the water they drank. Her gaze finally landed on the neatly stacked boxes of supplies from Evosense. Each shipment included an assortment of goods, canned food, bottled water, and vitamins labeled as essential wellness formula. The vitamins caught her attention. They were new, only introduced in the last few months, and came with a sleek design and minimal labeling. Amara retrieved a bottle from the pantry and studied it closely. The ingredients list was vague, filled with scientific terms she didn't recognize. Something about it felt off. She decided to quietly remove the vitamins from circulation, placing the remaining bottles in a locked cabinet. She didn't want to raise alarm until she was sure, but a growing suspicion gnawed at her. Could these vitamins be connected to the symptoms? That night, as the women slept, Amara sat in her dimly lit office, her mind racing with questions. She knew she needed help, someone who could analyze the vitamins and uncover their secrets. Reaching for her phone, she dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Danny," she said when the line connected, "it's Amara. I need your expertise. Can you come to the center tomorrow? It's urgent." As she hung up, a sense of determination settled over her. Whatever was happening, she would get to the bottom of it. The women in her care had already suffered enough. She wouldn't let them become victims again. The air in the center was thick with unease. As days turned into weeks, more women began showing symptoms. Dizziness and nausea became commonplace, and the number of confirmed pregnancies climbed steadily. For a facility meant to be a sanctuary, the atmosphere now felt oppressive, clouded by fear and suspicion. Amara, normally composed under pressure, found herself restless. Her nightly routine of reviewing the center's finances and schedules was replaced by hours spent poring over medical records and supply inventories. She had locked away the remaining bottles of vitamins from Evosensa, convinced they were key to the mystery. But she needed proof. The following afternoon, a dusty blue sedan pulled up to the center's gates. Out stepped Danyal Malik, known to his friends simply as Danny, a molecular biologist and professor at a nearby university. His wiry frame was dressed in a wrinkled button-down shirt and jeans, his face framed by glasses and an unkempt beard. He had worked with Amara years ago, during her time as a social worker, and though they hadn't spoken in some time, their bond remained strong. "Danny, thank you for coming." Amara greeted him at the door, her expression betraying both relief and exhaustion. "Amara," he replied, offering a small smile, "when you said it was urgent, I didn't expect this level of urgency. What's going on?" She ushered him into her office, where the locked cabinet held the stash of Evosensi vitamins. As she explained the situation, the mysterious symptoms, the pregnancies, the center's reliance on Evosensi's supplies, Danny's brow furrowed. "Do you have a sample I can analyze?" he asked. Amara unlocked the cabinet and handed him a bottle. The sleek black and white label bore the words Essential Wellness Formula. Below that, in smaller print, was the tagline, Boostin' Vitality for Every Woman. The ingredients list was short, almost suspiciously so, with vague references to proprietary blends and naturally derived compounds. "I'll need to take this to the lab," Danny said, slipping the bottle into his bag. "But I can tell you right now, this labeling is intentionally vague. It's designed to look harmless while telling you nothing." "Do you think these vitamins could be causing the symptoms?" Amara asked. "It's possible," Danny replied. "Synthetic compounds can have unexpected effects, especially if they're poorly tested. But I won't know for sure until I run some tests." As Danny prepared to leave, Amara stopped him. "One more thing," she said. "I need to be sure nothing else is happening here. Can you help me set up additional security cameras? I want eyes on every corner of this place." Danny nodded. "Of course. Let's do it now." Together, they spent the evening installing small, discrete cameras in the common areas, hallways, and near the supply storage. Amara wanted to rule out the possibility of external interference, though her instincts told her the threat was already inside. That night, as the women slept, Amara sat at her desk, unable to shake her unease. The center's residents were her responsibility. Many of them had come here to escape exploitation, only to find themselves at the mercy of an invisible threat. She stared at the locked cabinet, the black and white labels taunting her with their emptiness. The next morning, Danny called with preliminary results. His voice was measured but tinged with urgency. "Amara, there's definitely something off with these vitamins. The compounds I've identified include synthetic hormones, ones that can disrupt the endocrine system." Amara's stomach sank. "Hormones? What kind?" "Primarily ones that mimic estrogen and progesterone," Danny explained. "In high enough doses, they could cause all kinds of physiological changes, weight gain, nausea, and yes, even pregnancy-like effects. If someone's already fertile, it could increase the likelihood of conception." Amara's mind raced. "Are you saying these women were essentially dosed with a pregnancy-enhancing drug without their knowledge?" "It looks that way," Danny replied. "I'm running more tests to confirm, but the evidence is damning. Whoever formulated this knew what they were doing." After hanging up, Amara sat in stunned silence. Her suspicions had been correct, but the confirmation felt like a punch to the gut. Evosensi wasn't just negligent. They were deliberately experimenting on the most vulnerable. Determined to confront the company, Amara reached out to their customer service line. The call was routed through a series of polite but evasive representatives, each passing her along to someone better equipped to assist. Finally, she was connected to a man who introduced himself as a regional director. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Miss Thomas," he said smoothly after she explained her concerns. "Our products undergo rigorous testing. If your residents are experiencing health issues, I'd suggest consulting a medical professional." "We have," Amara snapped, "and the evidence points to your vitamins. I need to know what's in them, specifically the proprietary blends you're so keen on keeping secret." "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information," the director replied. "But I assure you, our products meet all safety standards." "Then why are women in my center falling ill?" Amara demanded. "Why are they pregnant without explanation?" The line went quiet for a moment before the man spoke again, his tone icy. "Miss Thomas, I suggest you tread carefully. Accusations like these could harm your center's reputation. Evosense has been a generous supporter, but if you continue this line of inquiry, we may have to reconsider our partnership." The call ended, leaving Amara seething. It was clear the company wasn't going to cooperate. She needed a new approach. Later that night, as she reviewed the day's security footage, something caught her attention. In the dim glow of the camera's infrared filter, she watched as one of the women entered the pantry and lingered near the cabinet where the vitamins had been stored. The woman, Fatima, seemed hesitant, her movements slow and deliberate. She reached for the locked cabinet but found it sealed, then left the room. Amara rewound the footage, studying it carefully. Fatima's behavior was unusual, almost as if she knew something about the vitamins. The discovery added another layer of complexity to an already tangled mystery. The next day, Amara called a private meeting with Fatima. Sitting across from her in the small office, she asked gently, "Is there something you'd like to tell me?" Fatima hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. I didn't want to say anything before," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I've been feeling strange ever since I started taking those vitamins." "Strange how?" Amara pressed. Fatima described her symptoms, similar to those of the other women, but added something new, vivid dreams and a sense of unease she couldn't shake. "It's like something's wrong inside me," she said, clutching her hands together. Amara listened intently, her resolve hardening. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the picture they formed was more horrifying than she could have imagined. Evosense had turned her sanctuary into a laboratory, and her residents into unwilling test subjects. The next step was clear. She needed to expose the truth, but doing so would require more than evidence. It would require courage, strategy, and the willingness to face whatever backlash came her way. For the women of the center, and for all those who had suffered in silence, Amara knew she couldn't back down. The center had fallen into an uneasy rhythm. Each passing day brought more questions than answers, and the women, though outwardly continuing their routines, were clearly shaken. The strange symptoms persisted, with more residents joining the growing list of those affected. The once vibrant atmosphere of the center now carried a heavy, unspoken tension. Amara had become consumed by the investigation. Every spare moment was spent reviewing security footage, consulting with Danielle, or poring over reports and records. The vitamins from Evosensa were locked away, but the damage had already been done. With the evidence Danielle had uncovered, Amara was certain that the corporation was responsible, but proving it and holding them accountable felt like an insurmountable challenge. Danielle arrived at the center late one evening, his face grim. He carried a folder of lab results and a portable hard drive. Amara met him in her office, where a single lamp illuminated the cluttered desk. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the weight of what they were about to discuss. "I've completed the analysis," Danielle began, placing the folder in front of her. "The compounds in those vitamins are far beyond what should be in any consumer product, let alone something marketed as a wellness supplement." Amara flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing as she scanned the technical jargon. "Can you simplify this for me?" she asked. Danielle nodded. "The formula contains synthetic hormones, specifically high levels of estrogen and a compound that mimics progesterone. It's designed to enhance fertility, likely as part of a reproductive study. But here's the catch. These doses are experimental. They haven't been tested in controlled environments, let alone on actual people." "Reproductive study?" Amara repeated, the words catching in her throat. "Are you saying these women were targeted because they're vulnerable?" "Exactly," Daniel said. "The profile fits. Isolated, limited access to medical care, and unlikely to raise alarms if something went wrong. They're treating your center as a controlled environment without your consent." Amara's jaw tightened. "This is criminal. They're experimenting on women who came here to escape trauma, women who trusted me to keep them safe." Danielle hesitated before adding, "There's more. I traced some of the compounds to a subsidiary of Evosensi that specializes in clinical trials. It seems like they're testing these hormones under the radar, bypassing regulatory oversight." The weight of his words settled over Amara like a lead blanket. Her sanctuary, the place she had built to protect and heal, had been infiltrated and exploited. The anger she felt was matched only by her determination to set things right. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as she formulated a plan. "We need more evidence," she said finally. "I want to know exactly how far this goes and who's responsible." Danielle tapped the hard drive on the desk. "I've compiled everything I've found so far, including links to their clinical research and the chemical breakdown of the vitamins. It's a start, but we'll need testimony from the women and a way to tie Evo-sensei directly to the results." Amara nodded. "I'll talk to them. They deserve to know the truth. And if they're willing, Their stories will make this impossible to ignore. The next day, Amara called a meeting with the affected women. They gathered in the common room, their expressions wary but curious. Layla, Fatima, Sophie, and the others sat in a loose circle, their body language reflecting both solidarity and uncertainty. "I've asked you all here because I need to share what I've learned," Amara began, her voice steady but somber. "We've been investigating the vitamins provided by Evo Sensei, and the results are disturbing." She explained the findings in careful, straightforward terms, avoiding the technical details but emphasizing the key points. The presence of synthetic hormones, the experimental nature of the formula, and the likelihood that their symptoms and pregnancies were a direct result. The room fell silent as the women absorbed her words. Layla was the first to speak. "So, they're using us? Like guinea pigs?" Amara nodded, her heart aching at the betrayal etched across Layla's face. "That's what it looks like, and it's unacceptable." Fatima crossed her arms, her voice trembling with anger. "They think we don't matter, that no one will care what happens to us. They're wrong," Amara said firmly. "We care, and we're going to hold them accountable." The women began to speak, their initial shock giving way to a mixture of rage and determination. They shared their experiences, their fears, and their resolve to fight back. Amara listened, her resolve strengthening with every word. By the end of the meeting, they had agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. Amara and Danielle would document their stories and compile a detailed report to present to journalists and legal experts. It was a risky move, but it was the only way to expose the truth. As the women returned to their rooms, Amara sat alone in the common room, her mind racing. The fight ahead would be difficult, and the stakes were higher than ever. But she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't stop until justice was served. These women had endured enough, and she would ensure their voices were heard. Later that night, as she reviewed the security footage once again, something caught her attention. One of the cameras near the storage area captured a shadow moving in the darkness. Amara leaned closer, her pulse quickening as she watched the figure linger near the pantry. The angle was poor, and the person's identity was obscured, but their actions were deliberate. Whoever it was, they seemed to be searching for something. Amara rewound the footage and played it again, her mind racing. The figure opened a cabinet, paused as if considering their options, and then left empty-handed. Amara made a mental note to investigate further. The situation was spiraling into something far more complex than she had anticipated, but she was determined to uncover every detail. There was no turning back now. The next morning began with a tense air settling over the center. Amara woke early, her mind clouded by the image of the shadowy figure from the security footage. The grainy recording played on a loop in her head as she prepared for the day. She had no idea who the intruder could be, but she knew this was no random occurrence. Someone had been searching for something, and it was too much of a coincidence to ignore. She started her day as usual, moving through the common areas to greet the residents and assess the atmosphere. The women, though clearly shaken by the revelations of the previous day, seemed resolute. Many had begun to find strength in the knowledge that they were not alone in this struggle. Even Layla, who had been withdrawn and fearful since the onset of her symptoms, seemed to stand a little taller. After breakfast, Amara called Danielle. His calm, analytical voice on the other end of the line gave her a sense of stability in the chaos. "I need you to come back to the center," she said. "I've found something on the footage and I want you to take a look." "I'll be there in an hour," he replied without hesitation. When Danielle arrived, Amara led him to her office, where she had queued up the footage from the previous night. As the video played, she pointed to the figure lingering near the pantry. Danielle leaned closer, studying the screen with a critical eye. "It's hard to make out much," he said after a moment. "The lighting is terrible, and they're deliberately avoiding the cameras. Whoever this is, they know what they're doing." Amara nodded. "It doesn't make sense. The vitamins are locked up, and I haven't told anyone where they are. If this person was looking for them, how would they even know to search there?" Daniel frowned. "Maybe they were looking for something else. Or maybe they've been listening." The possibility sent a chill down Amara's spine. She had always prided herself on the center being a safe space, but the idea of someone eavesdropping, possibly working against her, was deeply unsettling. "I want to increase security," she said. "More cameras, better angles, and maybe even motion sensors in key areas." Danielle nodded. "I can help with that. But Amara, if this person is part of the center, you need to be prepared for what that might mean." Amara didn't reply immediately. She knew he was right, but the thought of one of her residents betraying the trust of the group was hard to accept. These women had already been through so much. The idea that one of them could be complicit in Evo Sensei's scheme felt like a betrayal of everything the center stood for. Later that day, Amara gathered the affected women for one-on-one conversations. She wanted to dig deeper into their experiences and see if any of them might have noticed unusual behavior or remembered details they hadn't yet shared. The interviews were emotionally draining, but they yielded small pieces of information that began to form a clearer picture. Layla mentioned that she had been feeling off since shortly after the vitamins were introduced. "At first, I thought they were helping," she admitted. "I had more energy, and I felt happier, but then the nausea started, and I couldn't focus. It's like my body was turning against me." Fatima shared a similar story, but added that she had noticed subtle changes in her mood. "I felt jittery, like I couldn't sit still, and the dreams—" Her voice trailed off, and she hesitated before continuing. "They were so vivid, like memories that weren't mine." Amara pressed her gently. "What kind of memories?" "Children," Fatima said quietly. "Pregnancy. It was like I could feel it, even though I knew it wasn't real. But now—" Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Amara made careful notes, her heart sinking with each revelation. The vitamins weren't just physical, they were psychological, invading these women's minds as well as their bodies. That evening, after the interviews were complete, Amara and Danielle began reviewing the updated footage from the cameras they had installed earlier in the day. This time, the images were clearer, and the intruder's movements were easier to track. The figure returned to the pantry, hesitated near the locked cabinet, and then moved toward the common room. They watched as the person rifled through drawers and shelves, pausing occasionally to look over their shoulder. At one point, the figure pulled out a piece of paper, studied it briefly, and then stuffed it into their pocket before leaving the room. "Did you see that?" Amara asked, rewinding the footage. Danielle nodded. "They're looking for something specific. The question is, what?" The two spent hours combing through the footage, mapping the intruder's movements and cross-referencing them with the layout of the center. By the time they finished, they had a rough idea of the person's route, but still no clue about their identity. Determined to take control of the situation, Amara devised a plan. The next night, she and Danielle would monitor the cameras in real time, ready to confront the intruder if they returned. It was a risky move, but she couldn't allow this to continue unchecked. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the center, Amara prepared herself for what lay ahead. The women she had sworn to protect were counting on her, and she wouldn't let them down. Whatever secrets Evo Sensi had buried, she was going to unearth them, no matter the cost. The night stretched long and heavy over the center. Amara sat in her dimly lit office, the glow from the multiple monitors casting sharp shadows on her face. Beside her, Daniel adjusted his laptop, syncing the live camera feeds to his screen for better visibility. The quiet hum of the equipment was the only sound in the room. Outside, the women had retired to their rooms, the silence punctuated only by the occasional creak of the building settling into the night. Amara checked the time. Midnight. The intruder, whoever they were, had shown a pattern of moving under the cover of darkness when the center was still. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the screens, scanning each camera angle for any sign of movement. "It's a waiting game now," Daniel said, breaking the silence. Amara nodded. "They'll show up. Whoever this is, they're too deliberate to stop now." The minutes dragged on, and Amara's focus sharpened with each tick of the clock. Then, at 1:07 a.m., a shadow moved across the screen displaying the hallway near the pantry. Amara leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. "There," she whispered, pointing to the figure. The intruder was dressed in dark clothing, their movements cautious but purposeful. They paused briefly at the door to the pantry, their head turning as if listening for any sound. Amara's pulse quickened as she watched them move to the cabinet where the vitamins had been stored. "They're back," Daniel murmured, his fingers flying across the keyboard to enhance the video quality. Amara rose silently, gesturing for Daniel to stay behind. "Keep watching. If they leave this area, let me know immediately." She slipped out of her office and into the hallway, moving with practiced stealth. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of pine from the surrounding woods. Amara's footsteps were soundless on the worn carpet as she approached the pantry. She stopped just outside the door, listening. Inside, she could hear the soft rustling of paper and the muted clink of objects being moved. The intruder was searching for something, but what? Taking a deep breath, Amara pushed the door open, the hinges creaking softly. The figure froze, their back to her. For a moment, the two stood in tense silence, the air crackling with unspoken words. Then the intruder turned, their face illuminated by the dim overhead light. "Fatima?" Amara's voice was a mix of disbelief and confusion. The woman's face was pale, her expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "I can explain," she said quickly, raising her hands in a placating gesture. Amara stepped further into the room, her tone firm. "Then start explaining. What are you doing in here? Why were you going through the cabinet?" Fatima hesitated, her gaze darting to the floor. I was trying to find the vitamins." "Why?" Amara pressed. Tears welled in Fatima's eyes, but she blinked them away, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Because I think they did something to us. I started feeling strange after I began taking them, and then the dreams, the symptoms, it all started after the vitamins arrived." Amara's heart sank. "Fatima, why didn't you come to me sooner?" "I was scared," Fatima admitted. "I thought you'd think I was crazy, or worse, that you'd think I was lying." Amara softened, her frustration giving way to empathy. "You should have trusted me, but I believe you now. I need to know everything." Fatima hesitated, then nodded. She sat at one of the small tables, her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "It started a few months ago. At first, the vitamins seemed fine. My energy was up, and I felt healthier. But then I started having these vivid dreams. They were so real, like memories that didn't belong to me. I started noticing the nausea, the dizziness, and then her voice broke and she looked away. You realized you were pregnant, Amara finished gently. Fatima nodded. But it doesn't make sense. I haven't been with anyone. I thought maybe something was wrong with me, like a sickness or a tumor. But then I saw the others, and I knew it wasn't just me. Amara placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You're not alone in this. We're going to get to the bottom of it. Fatima looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Do you really think we can stop them? Evo Sense is so powerful. We can, Amara said firmly, but I need your help. You know something about these vitamins more than you're telling me. What is it? Fatima hesitated again, then took a deep breath. I overheard one of the delivery drivers talking to another worker. They didn't know I was listening. They said something about a trial batch, and that the center was a perfect environment for testing. I didn't understand what they meant at the time, but now, her words trailed off, leaving Amara stunned. The center had been deliberately targeted. The women, already vulnerable, already struggling, had been chosen for their isolation and lack of resources. It was a chilling revelation, but it confirmed what Amara had suspected all along. Back in the office, Daniel was waiting with updates from the footage. I tracked Fatima's movements, he said as Amara entered. She's been in and out of the pantry several times over the past few weeks, always late at night, always alone. She just told me why, Amara replied, filling him in on what she had learned. Daniel's face darkened. That's damning evidence. If we can connect this to the shipments and the company's internal communications, we'll have enough to expose them, Amara finished. The night ended with a new plan in place. Amara and Daniel would gather more evidence, interviews, records, and security footage. Fatima, now an ally, agreed to share everything she knew and encourage others to do the same. The fight was far from over, but for the first time Amara felt a glimmer of hope. The storm was coming, and she was ready to face it head-on. The air in the center was electric with tension as Amara worked tirelessly to prepare her case against Evo Sense. Daniel's research had become the backbone of their efforts, while Fatima's testimony served as the emotional anchor, a stark reminder of what was at stake. Every moment was consumed with gathering evidence, interviewing residents, combing through shipment logs, and meticulously analyzing the security footage. Amara knew that their fight would only succeed if their case was airtight. The women affected by the vitamins had become Amara's fiercest allies. Once hesitant to speak out, they now channeled their anger and fear into action. Layla worked closely with Amara, recounting her experiences in vivid detail. Sophie documented every symptom and change she had experienced since arriving at the center. Even Fatima, once quiet and reserved, took a leading role, encouraging others to come forward with their stories. Meanwhile, Daniel's findings grew more damning by the day. His latest report revealed additional compounds in the vitamins, synthetic hormones that not only heightened fertility but also interfered with the brain's natural regulatory systems. These aren't just experimental, he told Amara during one of their late-night strategy sessions. They're reckless. Whoever developed this formula knew it wasn't ready for human use. Amara's rage simmered beneath her calm exterior. She had always known the world could be cruel, but the calculated exploitation of vulnerable women felt like a new low. She resolved to make Evo Sense pay, not just for what they had done to her residents, but for every corner they had cut, every life they had put at risk. Her first step was reaching out to journalists. Amara contacted a local investigative reporter, Nina Herrera, whose work exposing corporate corruption had earned her a reputation for tenacity. Nina was intrigued by the story, but cautious. "I'll need solid evidence," she told Amara during their first call. "Something undeniable. If this is as big as you're saying, it'll make waves, but we need to be ready for the fallout." Amara invited Nina to the center, where she laid out the evidence they had collected so far. Nina listened intently, her sharp eyes scanning every document, her mind already piecing together the narrative. When Fatima and Layla shared their stories, Nina's skepticism gave way to outrage. "This is bigger than I thought," she admitted. "If we can verify these claims, Eva Sensi won't be able to sweep this under the rug." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Nina and her team worked alongside Amara and Danielle, cross-referencing every piece of information and conducting their own investigations into Eva Sensi's practices. What they uncovered was shocking. A pattern of unethical behavior, including falsified safety reports and secret trials conducted in underprivileged communities around the world. As the evidence mounted, Amara prepared the residents for the media storm that would follow. She called a meeting in the common room where the women gathered in anxious silence. "I know many of you are scared," she began, her voice steady but warm. "Speaking out against a company like Eva Sensi is a risk. They have money, power, and connections. But we have something stronger, the truth, and the truth can't be silenced." The room erupted in quiet murmurs of agreement. Layla was the first to stand, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. "They've taken enough from us. It's time we take something back." One by one, others stood to voice their support. Amara felt a swell of pride and determination as she looked at the women she had come to think of as family. They had faced unimaginable hardship, yet they stood united, ready to fight for justice. Nina's article was published 2 weeks later, a searing exposé titled "Tested Without Consent: Eva Sensi and the Exploitation of Vulnerable Women." It detailed the corporation's unethical practices, supported by interviews, lab analyses, and internal documents obtained through whistleblowers. The story went viral within hours, igniting a firestorm on social media. Hashtags like #Justice for the Center and #EvoSenseExposed trended worldwide, drawing attention from activists, politicians, and even celebrities. The backlash against Eva Sensi was swift and severe. Protesters gathered outside the company's headquarters, demanding accountability. Consumers boycotted their products, and shareholders began to question the leadership's decisions. The pressure reached a boiling point when a coalition of advocacy groups announced plans to file a class-action lawsuit on behalf of the affected women. Despite the growing support, Amara knew the fight was far from over. Eva Sensi responded with aggressive tactics, hiring high-profile lawyers to discredit the claims and launching a PR campaign to salvage their reputation. Ads flooded the airwaves, portraying the company as a beacon of innovation and philanthropy. Statements from their executives framed the center's residents as misinformed and manipulated by external forces. But the women refused to back down. Fatima and Layla became the public faces of the movement, appearing on talk shows and giving interviews to counter Eva Sensi's narrative. Their courage inspired others to come forward, and soon, similar stories began emerging from other communities around the world. The scope of Eva Sensi's exploitation was staggering, and public outrage continued to grow. Amara worked tirelessly behind the scenes, coordinating with lawyers, activists, and journalists. The center became a hub of activity, its halls buzzing with the energy of a movement gaining momentum. Despite the chaos, Amara remained focused, her resolve unshaken. One evening, as she sat in her office reviewing the latest developments, Daniel knocked on the door. "You should see this," he said, holding up his phone. Amara took the device and watched as a video played. It was a statement from a former Evo Sensei employee who had come forward as a whistleblower. The man, his face blurred for protection, detailed the company's secret trials and their deliberate targeting of vulnerable populations. "They knew what they were doing," he said. "They didn't care about the risks because they thought no one would notice." The video was a turning point. With an insider's testimony added to the growing pile of evidence, Evo Sensei's denials became increasingly untenable. A class action lawsuit gained traction, and legal experts predicted that the company would face massive penalties. For the first time in weeks, Amara allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. The road ahead would still be long, but the tide had turned. The women of the center had found their voices, and the world was finally listening. The air in the center felt different now, lighter somehow. The oppressive tension that had gripped the residents for months began to lift as the movement against Evo Sensei gained momentum. Though the scars of the past lingered, there was a sense of hope and empowerment that hadn't been there before. The women, once afraid and uncertain, now walked with purpose, their collective strength evident in everything they did. Amara sat in her office surrounded by stacks of legal documents and news clippings detailing the fallout from Nina's exposé. The class action lawsuit against Evo Sensei was in full swing, with multiple law firms joining forces to represent the women from the center. Public support remained strong, bolstered by the whistleblower's testimony and the growing number of victims coming forward from other communities. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Fatima, her expression a mixture of pride and nervousness. She held a letter in her hands, the official letterhead of the legal team unmistakable. "It's here," she said, handing the envelope to Amara. Amara opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the neatly printed text. A smile spread across her face as she reached the conclusion. "It's official," she said, looking up at Fatima. "They've agreed to a settlement." Fatima's eyes widened. "Does that mean—" "It means they're admitting fault," Amara confirmed. "And every woman affected will receive compensation, along with funding for ongoing medical care." The news spread quickly through the center, sparking a wave of celebration. The women gathered in the common room where laughter and tears of relief filled the space. For many, the settlement represented more than just financial support. It was validation, a recognition of the injustice they had endured, and a promise of accountability. But Amara knew their work wasn't done. She had spent sleepless nights considering the future of the center, determined to ensure it could never be exploited again. The settlement funds provided a rare opportunity to rebuild, to create something stronger and more resilient. Over the next few weeks, the center underwent a transformation. Amara worked with the residents to redesign the space, turning it into a self-sustaining community. The once modest vegetable garden was expanded into a thriving farm, providing fresh produce for the residents and surplus to sell at local markets. Workshops were upgraded with new tools and materials, allowing the women to hone their skills and generate additional income. The center also established partnerships with local organizations, bringing in experts to provide education and training. Classes on financial literacy, vocational skills, and self-defense became regular fixtures, empowering the women to regain control of their lives. Amara even reached out to Daniel, who helped set up a small lab on site where residents could learn about basic science and health. One of the most significant changes was the creation of a leadership council composed of the residents themselves. Each woman had a voice in decision-making, ensuring that the center truly belonged to the community it served. The council met weekly, addressing issues and planning initiatives to improve their shared home. For Fatima, Layla, Sophie, and the others, the experience of standing up to Evosensi had sparked a profound shift. They became mentors to newer residents, sharing their stories and helping others find their strength. Fatima, who had once struggled to trust others, took on a leadership role within the council, her confidence and determination inspiring those around her. Amara watched with pride as the center flourished. It was no longer just a refuge. It was a beacon of resilience and hope, a place where women could reclaim their autonomy and build brighter futures. One afternoon, as Amara walked through the garden, she came across a group of children playing among the rows of vegetables. Layla's son, a lively toddler, chased a butterfly while Sophie's newborn daughter dozed peacefully in a sling. The sight filled Amara with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. Despite everything they had endured, these women and their children were thriving. Daniel joined her, carrying a basket of freshly picked tomatoes. "Looks like the community's growing," he said with a smile. Amara nodded. "It's amazing, isn't it? They've come so far." "And so have you," Daniel pointed out. "You've turned this place into something incredible." Amara looked out over the bustling center, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I didn't do it alone. It was all of us, working together, believing in each other." As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the center, Amara felt a deep sense of peace. The fight against Evosensi had been grueling, but it had also been transformative. The center was stronger than ever, a testament to the power of resilience and solidarity. And while there were still challenges ahead, Amara knew they would face them together as a community. The center had become more than just a safe haven. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always the possibility of renewal. The laughter of children echoed through the garden as Amara and Daniel returned to the main building. Inside, the women were gathered for their weekly meeting, their voices carrying the energy of a group determined to create a better world. Amara joined them, ready to listen, to learn, and to lead. Together, they were unstoppable. Thank you for watching to the end. If you like this story, please support us by liking and subscribing so you don't miss our new videos. Share this video with your friends. They will definitely be interested. And in the comments, write what you think about this story and what topics you would like to see in the future. See you in the next video.